we need to peel all of that back. And all of those onion layers are shadow. They're masks we wear. In this work of neural manifestation, which is so different than the old New Age kind of spiritual bypass approach, the more you say no, the more magnetic you become. From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips.
And your host, Jessica Gill.
As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. Part of our manifestation process entails expanding past your limiting subconscious beliefs. Therefore, by tuning into this podcast with interviews from experts, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, scientists, and those with neural manifestation success stories, you're starting the process of expanding your subconscious in order to see to believe that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Expanded Podcast. Jessica here. We are in week 2 of the Magnetic Self Challenge. That is all about reconnecting with our soul's desires, our passions, who we truly are on the inside, and reconnecting with our true self-confidence and high self-worth. And now, only week 2 in, people are already starting to notice massive shifts. They are feeling more grounded, more regulated, more connected with their true essence that they hadn't felt before. Some manifestations are coming through and some tests are coming through. Now, in the manifestation work, a test means the universe is asking you to up-level your level of self-worth in order to meet the manifestation that wants to connect with you on the other side. Basically, a test is an opportunity for a healing moment. So the fact that that's happening means that things are in motion to connect with you. And one other thing I've noticed, a few people have pointed this out, is that they are starting to get little hints and clues as to what might be in the way. Maybe it's a younger shadow part, maybe it's a core limiting belief. They're starting to notice what parts are popping up that don't feel magnetic. And that's what we're going to really work on in week 3 and week 4 of this challenge. And don't worry, it's not too late to join the challenge. If you're a Pathway member, you can just open up your membership portal. It'll be right in there for you to join at any point. If you're not a member yet, now is the perfect time because we have our big summer sale going on where you can check the link in the show notes and spin the spinner to lock in your lowest rate of the season. So you've heard the term shadow be thrown around. We talk about it a lot here at To Be Magnetic, but on basic layman's terms, what is the shadow? What's going on? How does it impact our manifestation? And why do we have a whole week dedicated to it in the Magnetic Self Challenge? We are going to dive into that and more in today's episode. We are throwing it way back to an Explained Shadow episode that we had recorded previously with myself, Lacy, and Dr. Tara Swart, neuroscientist, medical doctor, executive advisor, senior lecturer at MIT Sloan, best-selling author of The Source, and she has worked with us as our neuroscience and psychology advisor. And I'm going to just give you a little shadow tip before we jump into the episode on how to maybe digest this concept of shadow. So I think of the shadow as a part of us that we are so ashamed of or embarrassed of, a part of us that we are hiding. And we are spending a lot of energy convincing ourselves, convincing others that that is not who we are. And the more that we spend energy hiding that part, the less energy we have to just embody and live from our magnetic self. So the shadow and working with the shadow, specifically in the Magnetic Self Challenge, is about reconnecting to that shadow part, understanding its story, why it's there, why it felt so inferior, and how can we perhaps integrate it in a different way so we don't spend so much energy hiding and instead can just live authentically as our true magnetic self? I think you guys are going to get a lot out of this episode and curious to see how your shadow parts start to reveal themselves over the next week.
And now, a word from our partners.
So as you guys know, we had a huge up level this year and we're able to build out an even more effective, integrated behind the scenes and for our customers platform where we can host all of our memberships and community groups. And we're so excited to announce that we have partnered with Kajabi to make this all happen. So Kajabi is an all-in-one business platform for knowledge entrepreneurs. They make it easy to build, market, and sell your online courses, membership sites, coaching programs, and more. And best of all, you don't need to learn to code or have to worry about plugins or broken integrations. And as a small business, one of the issues that we came across so many times is that from our payment methods to our backend websites to our membership emails, none of the tech communicated with each other and caused glitches and issues. But Kajabi solved that problem as an all-in-one spot. So we could build our landing website. We can have all of our membership access in one place, have all of our online courses built out custom to the way that we want them. We can have our secure payment gateway in there, email integrations, sales funnel software, our email marketing software, and analytics all in one place. And one of the best parts is they have incredible customer service. If you're a business owner out there, if you're thinking of launching an online course, perhaps have a membership site, even a coaching program, maybe you even want to host your public or private podcast, you can do it now all in one place, including send emails to those people and get real-time analytics. And our latest Magnetic Self Challenge is powered by Kajabi. They were our complete partners in making this thing a reality. They allowed us to integrate our audio for our deep imagining, video components of the workshop teachings, and seamless journal prompts to flow 1 week into the next. Kajabi is partnering with TBM and offering you guys a 1-month free trial. So they do custom plans depending upon what you need for your business. You can go in, sign up for the free trial, see a plan that works perfectly for your business and your business's needs, and see how effective Kajabi truly is. And I promise once you join, you will not look back. It has been such an incredible experience and just so grateful that companies like this exist who are really thinking of every single step for the business owner. So if you want to try out the free month trial, you can go to the link in our show notes where we'll have a custom URL where you can claim your free 30-day trial and check out more of what Kajabi has to offer.
All right, on to the episode.
So I'll kick us off with a quote. Take note of how you speak to yourself. There's a difference between taking responsibility for your life and perpetually punishing yourself. So I actually wanted to start here with this quote today because I feel like so many times people think shadow work is so fearful and it means you have to punish yourself for rejecting aspects of yourself or incorporating things that you don't like about yourself, and it's so scary. But actually, obviously taking accountability for yourself is important, but the shadow work isn't about continuing that cycle of shame. It's about integrating those parts so we release this shame. So I felt like this quote was really kind of on the nose of what shadow work is. Take responsibility for your life, but don't perpetually punish yourself for it. And when you can integrate your shadow, you can stop punishing yourself.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think another really important aspect of that is that you can fully start to be seen and fully start to access your authentic self, which means that you're not using as much energy as you have in the past to loop and be in insecurities and fear and worry and not good enough. So it's actually, like, more than anything, a path to freedom, in my opinion, rather than that perpetuation of shame, which is essentially what continuing to have shadow aspects that we know may exist, but we don't take the time to integrate them is. It's just like perpetuating that. Whereas when we do take the time to integrate and release and own, that's where the real freedom and happiness and authenticity comes. And of course, magnetism.
And so shadow is defined as, and we define at TBM, as qualities within humanity or yourself that you've deemed as unlovable due to pain, shame that you've experienced or witnessed. You've disowned these aspects of yourself and placed them in your shadow. This creates low self-worth on a subconscious level. So how does shadow work and understanding shadow play into manifestation? And how would you sort of define shadow from a neuroscience or psychology perspective also, Dr. Tara?
Yeah, let's kick it off to you first, Dr. Tara, so people have a really deep understanding of what shadow clinically is.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, Lacy, because I actually really loved the way that you said it, which was that you use up so much energy dealing with this shame and guilt. From a neuroscience point of view, we do use up quite a lot of energy on our own internal negative, or what I prefer to call survival emotions, like shame and guilt. But part of shadow is that because you're so ashamed of these aspects of yourself, you have to wear a mask to present yourself socially that doesn't give a glimpse of those things you're ashamed of to other people. And that's really hard work. So basically, you're using up cognitive resources to manage your own shame and to present a face to the world that doesn't have those horrible things in their character that you're so ashamed of. And manifestation it's hard work neurally. It's changing your brain pathways or strengthening weaker ones. And you need to be well rested and well resourced in terms of your diet and your mindset to be able to really go through that work without, sort of draining yourself and to do it to the best of your ability. So to the first part of Jessica's question, I would say that, yes, we approach shadow work with a lot of fear. Even I did, even though I'm a psychiatrist and I understand the theory of it. I felt that if I did unblocked shadow, I would find out all sorts of things about myself that I didn't want to find out. It's almost like the better you are at throwing things into your shadow, the more you have to fear about what you then may face. So there's that fear, which in any type of learning, and neural manifestation is a way of learning because it's changing your brain pathways, can inhibit that learning happening optimally. And also just how much hard work it is to connect up new neurons to overwrite brain pathways. So shadow is the part of your personality that you don't want to see. And when you're a baby or a child, you depend upon your caregivers to keep you safe and to build the neural architecture of trust and love. And so you work out what is good behavior and what you don't get rewarded for. So for example, if you're a child and you do something wonderful and you tell everyone about it and your parents say, oh, stop showing off, Tara, then what you sort of start to understand is that if I tell people the good things that I've done, my parents get angry with me. So I should put that into my shadow. If I do something good, I can be pleased with myself, but I must not tell anyone. And equally, last time we talked about jealousy and envy and sibling rivalry. So again, if you don't share with your siblings, if you are jealous because they're getting more attention from your parents, then you get told, oh, you're always so jealous of your siblings. So anything that you were told as a negative that you fear will mean that you don't have loving relationships in your life, you'll put away into your shadow. So it is a part of your innate personality, but it's one that you hide away. And I think it's confusing because there's a lot of psychoanalytic research, mostly from Freud and Jung, that uses different terms like ego and id and persona and animus and things like that. So Freud had 16 such terms. Jung had boiled it down to 4 and it was more progressive. So I personally prefer Jung's work. But basically, shadow is these difficult feelings that we don't like to face. And the ego is our sense of self. So we really rely on the ego to say, well, I would like to go and look at those things and see what they are and see what I can do about them. But if your sense of self isn't developed enough to do that, then it won't be happy to let those things come to the surface. So there's quite an internal battle in just even starting that work or, certainly going through it.
What I'm hearing from you, Dr. Tara, is also that you hear others perhaps shame you or shame people around you, because it can also be if you, let's say, see a friend get picked on for having a certain trait, then you're like, oh no, they got picked on. I don't want to have that either. You sort of reject that in yourself and suppress any aspects of that self that are similar in you and try to reject it and fight it off and pretend that's not you or you're not going to show that to anyone. And then the other piece too is that when that aspect surfaces, let's say your parents said you were jealous of a sibling, when jealousy shows up in you, you become really triggered, judgmental, defensive. You might project on others because it's like that aspect is coming to the surface and you're like, whoa, 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 I'm not supposed to be you. Go down, go down, go down.
Absolutely. You described two things you picked up on really well that I didn't describe as well as you. So one is if there are comments about other people or attitudes that you hear as you're growing up, like, oh, she's very interested in money, that can cause you to put talking about money or wanting wealth and abundance into your shadow. And that's why unblocked money, because it's a masculine trait. And so in women, the masculine traits can often be more hidden and vice versa. That could be very connected to shadow as well. And then you're quite right, all the things that you were particularly criticized for or personally saw other children suffer for, you're likely to have put into your shadow unless you had a very opposite experience yourself.
I also want to chime in on just a tiny tangent in teaching that you touched on, Dr. Tara, that I think is so important. Many people don't realize this when they're going through unblocked shadow, and they certainly don't realize it when they're doing manifestation work. And then I'll go into why this is so important for manifestation. But you mentioned a really good example of, say, your parents were saying, like, stop showing off or seeing your sibling that you're jealous of or whatever. But what I'm wanting to dissect there is that you can also hide in your shadow good qualities about yourself, which is really interesting to see. And that can present like not being able to take a compliment, not being able to receive is a version of that. And so that's really something to always kind of look at when you are doing unblocked shadow and you are doing this work. But I will pivot into manifestation and why this is so important that I figured out really early on. What we don't own owns us. And I certainly did not coin that term. You know, it's been around in the shadow world for a very long time. And so getting back to the primary belief of neural manifestation is that you are literally just trying to get back to your totally whole, worthy, authentic self, the way we were when we came onto the planet, as that brand new baby, you know, that fresh, clean slate. However, we go through a series just because of the human experience and our own parents or community or, you know, peers not having full integration modeled to them. We tend to experience pain, shame, and programming throughout our life. And when we're experiencing that every time, like Dr. Tara was pointing out, we tend to create what I call an onion around us, a protective ego shell. So it's basically, this is the layer I need in order to be loved. And this is another layer I need that isn't truthful to myself, but I've been shown or told or experienced that if I am my true self, I won't be loved. So I'm going to create this other layer until we create this persona. And this persona is usually what we're walking around in the world as. However, because the universe's goal for us is to be our truly whole, authentic, worthy self, like the true us, the way we came onto this planet, our soul's desire to experience this lifetime, we need to peel all of that back. And all of those onion layers are shadow. They're masks we wear. They're personas we've created to be loved, cool, accepted, in this work of neural manifestation, which is so different than the old new age kind of spiritual bypass approach. The more you say no, the more that you can be your authentic self and be in your worth, the more magnetic you become. So why that's connected is the more you peel away an onion layer, which can present as being very different now in your current peer group, like that you're showing up as a totally different person and people are like, what's going on there? That actually creates tremendous magnetism. Or when I used to take clients and people would come to me and they're like, how do I grow my following? You know, how do I grow my business? And I'm like, where are you hiding? Wherever you're hiding, wherever you're afraid to be seen, wherever you're not being your true authentic self is always an opportunity to become your most magnetic self and to create more magnetism. And that's why inner child work and shadow work, which tremendously go hand in hand and have a lot of overlap in the process, are the two most foundational workshops we always recommend the moment you sign up. You do how to manifest to learn the process, and then you go right into inner child and shadow to start to knock away that onion layer in order to create true magnetism, true authenticity, and then you continue the process. So that's how it's totally relatable to manifestation, which we can continue to dig in deeper.
Well, can I just completely back that up by saying when I was doing my research to do the Instagram post for To Be Magnetic on shadow, I found a really interesting kind of almost like a sub area of shadow, which is that if you have low self-esteem, you put good things into your shadow because, like Lacy just said, you can't accept a compliment. So actual really strong qualities that you want to hide because maybe you think people will be jealous of you or you don't, deserve to have that good thing in your personality. And funnily enough, the other day I was saying to someone who I introduced to Be Magnetic that I'd said no to a few pieces of work that I didn't want to do anymore. And then all these amazing opportunities came in. And she said, remember what Lacy says, no is the most magnetic word. And so I was like, I can't believe you're saying this to me now. So, and the thing is, you have to have sufficient self-worth to turn down opportunities when you know that they're not right for you. If you don't have that, you'll just say yes to everything. And that is quite related to shadow. And it's also related to not passing tests, which is related to not manifesting.
I think something really interesting to point out there too for the new listener or the person who has been doing this work for a while but is taking this work deeper. I love that you just pointed out you're not capable of saying no, or maybe you are capable of saying no to something or setting a boundary if you haven't done that work, that shadow work. However, as we point out in Unblock Boundary, if you don't have the subconscious projection to back it up, it means nothing. And what we mean by that is, let's say you're saying no to something, you're setting a boundary, you are presenting, you're trying to present more authentically, but you haven't actually done the subconscious reprogramming. So for the new listener, that's our very unique process of hypnosis called deep imaginings that you go through. And you access these old memories that are the root of a shadow aspect of yourself, and you begin to do the healing and integration of it in hypnosis. If you haven't done that yet and you go to say no to something, or you're trying to present more authentically or bypassing that in any way, nothing will change. So I think that that's a really interesting, I just wanted to kind of build on that point that you were making of how important it is to actually do the subconscious shadow work.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good segue too into listing some of the signs that you'll notice that you have shadow work to do. So we just have a long running list here, but these are some of the things that once you notice this coming up, it's a sign that there are shadow words down there that need to be integrated. So if you're judgmental or judging others, you have trouble accepting compliments, you feel triggered by others' opinions of you, you're aggressively confrontational instead of, calm conflict resolution, you're scared to dive deep emotionally, you feel shame or embarrassment of your past or your present, you feel envy or jealousy, you feel stuck in repetitive cycles and don't make changes, you place blame on other people and situations, you're triggered by being told what you don't want or what you don't like, and you don't feel capable or calm and productive to have conflict resolution at all.
I also think another really important one that we're seeing a lot in society today is when we're super triggered by something in the media or another person, we lash out and cancel culture is it's actually a really, really good example of shadow because it's actually hitting an inner wound that we have from childhood that's so painful for us that we haven't addressed. And the more we integrate it, we can actually show up rather than calling out or pointing fingers when we're really just pointing three fingers back at ourselves of the work we need to do. We can actually show up inspirationally and lead through inspiration where actual change comes from. I had this happen recently, actually, with somebody we've had on the podcast. She's an unblocker as well, and somebody who's really struggled through a lot of things that have gone on last year. They've directly really affected her and been very painful. And she used to feel the need to do what most of us do, lash out. And then it hit her that she was like, whoa, I need to do some serious inner child and shadow on this. And the more she did, she realized, wow, now I actually have power to lead through inspiration, through being a powerful voice that's integrated that people can listen to. So that's something to be very cognizant of this time too. And I'm not saying there's, no place for, certainly not saying, for people who are abusers and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying often, usually when we're triggered by something like that, it's really important to also do the integrated shadow work.
What you're saying, Lacy, is like there's a big difference between, let's say you hear a really horrific thing in the news. You're allowed to feel upset, angry, enraged, etc. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how you decide to channel your energy from that point. And so if you notice that you're going and tearing down others or tearing down yourself or in a bad mood the rest of the day and can't think straight, all of these things are signs that there's something deeper at play that may have been affected by you seeing this thing happen. But if you can sort of look at this horrific thing and say, okay, what are the ways I can use my innate abilities to change this cause if it really affects me? And what are ways that I can help problem solve that? It's almost like you can be bothered by both, but your reaction is what tells you where to go from there.
Yeah, and I think it's also like any other way we're triggered in our lives, it's always a call to action to look at why we're so triggered, because there's something personally going on there as well.
I also think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear what you two think about this, because we haven't particularly discussed this before, that aspects of ourself are on a sort of spectrum. So when life's going well and we feel secure, the same aspect can manifest in a different way to when we are feeling acutely or chronically stressed. And in the last year, people have been under unprecedented stress. So it would make absolute sense to me as a former psychiatrist that the bad end of the shadow aspect is showing up more. So, for example, if you have this one aspect of your personality, which is that you are assertive and you are confident and you are very clear about what you've accomplished, but under stress, that becomes like bragging and putting other people down, then it's important as well to know, how does this quality that is often a good quality of mine, how does it show up when I'm under stress? And doesn't always get worse, but the tendency is that when you're stressed, it's going to come out in more of a bad way. So I think some of those reactions, like getting more angry about something than maybe you normally would, can be because it's triggering you in your chronically stressed version of that aspect of your personality. Because Jung actually said that the shadow is the source of both our creative and destructive energies, and that this is related to the fact that once upon a time, they would have both had some sort of survival value. So in terms of actual physical survival, sometimes you have to destroy some things.
I really, really like that. And highlighting the stress factor is so, so huge, because I think everybody on different parts of the spectrum can relate to that right now. I mean, I can personally in my own life. I know we can on a global scale at this moment. And I think that that is a really great thing to perk people who are doing this work, your ears, your listening, to look at maybe, oh, that's another layer I can take through shadow.
Looking to kind of like a round table thing, just to get some more examples of like, well, what does a shadow word really look like? And how does it present when it's integrated versus not integrated? What are some examples or things that you guys have worked through shadow words in the past? And how were you able to reframe it? So, for example, one of mine in the past was the idea of trust issues, or being someone that had trust issues. It was very much in my shadow. In society, they like, oh, it's a crazy girl. She has trust issues, daddy issues, all of those really shameful terms. And so I didn't want to be someone that had that. So I rejected that was even a problem in my life. And it wasn't until I was at a place where I could look at it and be like, oh no, that's exactly what's going on here. And the second I did that, I was able to now use this term trust issues as a resource and be like, cool, how can I fix this? Now that I have this thing that is bothering me, how can I own it and fix it and work on it and integrate it? And so now it's sort of like a remedy for me because now I have a guidepost of where to go and where my work is. And so now, I mean, I'm saying it on a podcast that, 5-6 years ago, that would have been insane. I would have been like crying and cringing and would have never even admitted to that. My ego, pride, whatever you want to call it, was very bolsterous at that time. And so now saying it, I feel nothing. Like my heart's not racing. I'm not scared. I'm like, yeah, of course. That's definitely something I work through. And so it loses its charge in me.
Something I want to point out, just as a teaching for anybody listening, that's really cool about that is, and this is such a clear example of how shadow plays into manifestation. But so if we go back to 5 years ago, when that was such a scary shadow triggering word and you were doing everything possible to hide that consciously or unconsciously, what type of partners were showing up in your life at that time?
Yeah, the relationships were just a mess. And even dating partners, it took a rock bottom of a relationship to then understand, oh, this relationship ended because of trust issues. There was other components too, but this was a big part of why that relationship was not successful. And so I would say within a year of admitting that and working through that, I was able to find my now partner, Daniel.
It's such a beautiful example. So for the person who's like, oh, this all sounds really scary to look at this, when you actually go through that, which is, it becomes incredibly easy when you get the hang of it because you start to realize it's not nearly as scary after a couple of them. The beautiful thing is because then it holds no more weight in you or no more real trigger in you. Maybe little stuff will be attached to it, but you're not embarrassed of it anymore. You're not ashamed of it. You're not doing everything you can to hide it anymore. You'll start to then attract the people who are totally fine with that and accept you for that. Your authenticity will start attracting others' authenticity. So that's just such a clear example of manifestation. And then, of course, you manifested your now partner that you live with. And it's a really beautiful outline of that arc. And I can certainly take the floor on this. It's an example I share a lot, but it was probably the first really cognizant experience I had with integrating my shadow. And that was I used to have the biggest shame and fear around really poor grammatical spelling issues because I grew up with, two parents who had a little bit of college experience, and I was going back and forth from a couple of schools, but the primary ones I went to, because we lied and used my aunt's address so I could go to this school with my cousins, was a really fancy school with, everybody was wealthy and the parents were all higher education. And so I was really surrounded by, if you're not all of this, incredibly smart, well off, all the things of privilege, you're not lovable. And in fact, you're kind of trash. That was kind of what was being reflected. And that's a good example of, witnessed shadow. So that was something I carried really deep into my adult life, always so embarrassed of it, fearful of it. I somehow would surround myself around people that were quite smart and they would point it out and laugh at it, so it's just like perpetuated. And then it wasn't until I actually started the brand, and I was a blogger originally, that I had to address it because I was like, I don't have a copy editor at first. I just have to be myself. And that's when I also started doing the early, what would become Unblocked Shadow for myself. And that was one of the pivotal points that I remember. And the word that would come up for me, because again, we teach you in Unblocked Shadow, you have to find the most accurate word that has the most activation around it. Because if you're not feeling that true activation, it means dig deeper. So a word that could have come up for me maybe could have been uneducated. And that would have not had like for me personally, a ton of activation. So I had to keep digging and digging until I found this word. And you'll notice that things that, again, getting back into what we were talking about before, things you project onto other people tend to be the exact same thing you need to work on yourself. And one thing that I would refer to kind of in fun passing, and I'm a part of this, I come from a very small town, would be hillbilly. And when I hit that word, hillbilly, that had all of this crazy weight and activation. That was the perfect shadow word that correlated to me, having terrible grammatical spelling habits. And when I finally owned it through that 4-step process that all of you are doing right now through Unblocked Shadow, that was it. It took everything away. And guess what? My blog started to take off because I didn't care anymore. And in fact, on top of not caring, I was really open and honest about it. I'd be like, I'm a terrible speller. I'm terrible grammatically. I just would own it. And just like Jessica was explaining, the shame and everything, because it's gone, you start to then attract people who, and again, mine was showing up. It wasn't totally in partnership. I was in partnership. It was showing up in press. It was showing up in a lot of events to go to, people who would share my work. So it would go way further because I was being so authentic, they were drawn to that. So that's where, again, getting back to the root of magnetism is true worth and authenticity. There's so many people out there settling for unfulfilling relationships, or people who are stuck in toxic jobs, living in places and spaces that don't inspire them, and especially people who feel like they'll never be able to afford the things and the life that they truly desire. How do I know that? Because it was me before I discovered that manifestation is actually a totally viable, scientifically proven method of creating the life you want. I'm Lacy, I'm the founder of To Be Magnetic, and if you're not familiar with us, we at TBM offer workshops that teach you how to manifest literally everything, from love to money to career to beyond. Our courses are the most effective manifestation method on the market, and that's because of a secret that I discovered years ago about manifestation, which is you do not manifest from your thoughts. You manifest from your subconscious beliefs. So after decades of client research and input from leading doctors and therapists, we designed courses that help you rewire your subconscious mind to align with what you want to manifest. And the best part of all, for any skeptic out there, our work is completely scientifically proven to work. Just ask the tens of thousands of members inside our Pathway membership, which gives you unlimited access to all of our workshops, tools, and offerings that you'll use over the course of a year. This includes workshops on inner child, shadow, boundaries, love, money, the infamous ruts, and the horrible rock bottoms, and so much more.
And starting June 16th, we are dropping our Magnetic Self Challenge, where you can start living as your most confident, true, authentic self in just 6 weeks. And we have our big summer sale going on, where you can spin the spinner and lock in one of the biggest discounts of the season. That sale will be going on until July 4th at midnight PST.
Okay, now back to the episode.
I love both your stories. I don't actually think we've got enough time to go through all the shadow stories that I have on my list, but they would include the, trust issue thing. And so proud of Jessica for saying it the way that she has, and kind of similar story for me. And with your one, Lacy, I think because my father had a huge shadow aspect around being uneducated, that all of my parents' resources went into educating us. And so we didn't really have any spare money for anything else. So I was ashamed to invite my friends to my home. As a younger child, sort of hid the fact that we didn't have any spare money. And then, when I had some money of my own, maybe in my 20s, that I was very attached to things that signal that you have wealth, kind of like external things. And then it was only really, finally when you do the work, that settles into a very quiet comfort with having the level of wealth that you have, whatever that level is. And then one that I actually, would love to hear what Lacy has to say about is, and I think this relates interestingly to what we were saying last time about sibling rivalry, is that I was in such denial about jealousy or envy that I always said I could never, ever be jealous of any of my friends. Like, I just don't have that cell in my body. And occasionally if people said to me like, oh, well, you must inspire jealousy in some people, I'd just be like, I just can't understand that I don't think that's true. I don't think anybody that I know would ever be jealous of me. And it was actually only when I did your work, so quite recently, that I was able to integrate that jealousy is part of people's personalities and that anybody might feel that towards me or I might feel it towards someone. And that's okay. I almost think like that complete denial that I had is I wasn't even triggered because I just denied that it existed. So I think that's almost like a deeper form of shadow than some of my other examples.
Well, I love what you're saying about that. And I think we touched on this a little bit in the episode you're talking about, the envy and jealousy episode. I was actually with two friends yesterday and we were like together chatting for 4 hours. Yeah. And, something that I love that we brought up several times was, and I think I even said this in that episode, like if I find that people don't have my best interest, that I've let in close because I'm so warm and welcome and generous and open and like loyal beyond all loyalty, I will just be so loyal to people till the end. But the moment that I feel they aren't happy for me or they don't want the best for me, or there's even a fraction of drama or jealousy of any kind or envy of any kind, I'm like, nope, you're out. You're gone. I'm done. I don't really have that towards people. And it's a lot of what you're saying. And that's because I have a lot of shadow work to do. Why can't I accept and hold space for the person who has that going on? And then there's also the opposite side of the spectrum that I'm at a place too where life's too short and boundaries are too strong. And this is exactly what I said to my friends. I'm like, if I'm a doormat in that situation, which could be fine and could perpetuate and whatever, but I know that that's actually then blocking my wealth. It's blocking my love. It's blocking X, Y, and Z. And I don't have that time to waste. But I do recognize that I have work there to do. If I'm that triggered or that upset enough to have that much energy behind it, there's work for me. So I don't want to mitigate that boundaries aren't important and making sure that you're keeping things out of space that might be blocking it aren't important, but it's also recognizing, again, back to like you were giving the example, Jessica, of you're seeing something on the news that's so triggering, rightfully so, but if it's something that really has so much activation around it for someone, which usually tends to stem from fear or pain or shame, there's work there to be done. So I just really love that you said, Dr. Tara, that the first time you realized, because it was so sort of buried, you're like, oh no, this is shadow. I have that same thing in that process as well, even though I still honor boundaries and all of that.
I really like that example because I think that allows people to keep their boundaries that have them safe and help them with their manifestations. But then at the same time, it's not spiritual bypassing. It's really getting in and saying like, okay, I'm going to work on this and this activation, and I can be safe in this situation and not have someone around that potentially feels unsafe. And go at your own pace. You don't have to just keep all these activating people around for brute force just so you manifest quicker. Sometimes boundaries are necessary in those cases.
I love that. I think that's a really clear and important way to dissect it.
So one thing I wanted to bring up, because I thought it was really interesting, I heard on Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, he was talking about how he had lack mentality, which is often, a shadow piece of not having enough money. And so he always felt like he needed to reach XYZ number to feel safe. And he reached that number and then he didn't feel safe. And he was like, oh no, I need to reach this number to feel safe. That's the number. And then he reached that number and he still didn't feel safe. And so he was saying, yes, the lack programming is keeping him from feeling safe. And if he can sort of integrate that shadow aspect, he could feel more integrated. But Salma Hayek was on the episode and she pointed out the lack programming actually wasn't what helped him manifest the money, because he did, in fact, manifest these numbers. And so what probably helped him manifest the money was a different programming, such as like, I'm a survivor, I can get what I want. And so I kind of wanted to pull this out a bit because I think so many times people think, well, my shadow aspect is helping me get there. It's helping me be gritty and fight through this difficult situation. And you see people who might have lack and then they go on to achieve big things in life. But what's really happening is it's an imbalance of another programming that might be happening that's allowing them to achieve and manifest the thing. It's a little bit layered of a concept, but I just wanted to point out for anyone who might be thinking, well, this shadow aspect or this aspect that I haven't integrated is giving me my edge to help manifest. When really, if they boiled it down and all the layers there, it is still blocking them in a lot of ways. And if Dax had integrated this, perhaps he would have achieved inner peace and not needed these numbers. Like, what do you have to say on that, Lacy?
I think actually that is such a beautiful, tangible example of realizing that money is energy. And that's something you will often hear always. Max even says this all the time. He's grown up around people with great wealth and all of that stuff. And he's like, there will never be enough. You're the only person who has control of enough. And so your authentic code, which is in How to Manifest, I think it's such a great outline when doing unblocked money or working on shadow, because when you really get into your authentic code, you have anchors. So for instance, one of my pillars of my authentic code is luxury. But for me, luxury really means quality for the most part. So it's like I would rather have quality over quantity, and design, like great quality. So when you start to understand your true authentic soul desires rather than everything you're programmed to in the world. And this goes for everything, not just money or possessions or materialism. It goes towards the type of partner you think you want based on what society has told you, the type of career you think you're supposed to have based on what society has told you. When you can really root down and start to understand your authenticity, that's a beautiful anchor point. Then from that point, when you're working through unblocked money, which you find your very own money code, or you're working through unblocked shadow, you start to look at the ways that lack can show up in every way in your life. It can show up like in our jealousy and envy episode. That's lack in either capacity. So what I love about the example you gave is we have so many tools that help you go from this really abstract place of who you think you're supposed to be or have or do in order to be loved, and rooting you back into your true authenticity. And the way to do that, again, is through shadow work. And then ultimately, that's going to anchor you into money as energy. So, like when you're doing unblocked money, you start to understand the energetics of money. And therefore, you start to really integrate and release that lack. So ultimately what that does is it opens enough space for anything you truly desire, your soul truly desires, to come through.
And I'd just like to add from the sort of psychiatry and psychology point of view that I think there are some ways that people use words that cause confusion here. So it's very similar to me to how people sometimes say, oh, there is such a thing as good stress. But the definition of stress is when the load on your body, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is too much for you to bear. And similarly with shadow, the shadow isn't the thing that gives you the edge that makes you successful. It's only integrating shadow that can make you successful. That the whole point of putting things into your shadow is that it's holding you back because it's unseen. So it's not the lack mentality that led to the money. It's exactly as Jessica said, if that had been integrated, the chances are that it would have led to a much better outcome. And better doesn't always mean more money. It might be like Max says, it might be that I feel I have enough. That might be the best outcome. And especially where Dax has equated it to safety. Better might be, I feel safe. I don't need to do X to feel safe.
And that you become more magnetic and things come your way.
Exactly.
And I think, too, people underestimate. They're like, yeah, safe is cool, but like, I want the money. And it's like, can you imagine a world in which you don't want that material item, where the internal world is so taken care of, you feel so whole that you actually aren't craving that money like that? It's so interesting how this work starts to reveal so much more of your integrated soul as you're unraveling.
And I think that's the true message of consciousness at the end of the day. Doesn't mean you'll be broke. Certainly can actually mean that you will be incredibly financially successful. But I think that's the message we, receive from all of the teachers of that time, may it be Eckhart, Marianne Williamson, that had this awakening. It's essentially Buddhism at the end of the day. It's unattachment. It's not spiritual bypass version of unattachment, but it's getting to the root of unattaching from things that society has told you, or materialism, or whatever, that you need to be loved, and actually getting present and in the moment. And therefore, all of those people that I just named off are very financially successful. So it's a good example of, reaching true, or being on the pursuit of true consciousness.
And this is a slight tangent, but, and I want to speak a little bit about some of the sort of ethnic minority people that we interact with, which is that I come from a culture where I was told as a little girl that a woman who spends the night outside of her father's house or her husband's house is a bad woman. What that did to my shadow about my sexuality, and I'm talking about even wearing a short skirt, let alone having sex, is a similar thing about society telling you this or that about money or love in its broadest sense of the word, and what that can do to your sense of self and your sense of safety. So I think it does come down to exactly what you both said, which is it's consciousness and Buddhism, which is the lack of attachment to the kind of meaning that society puts on all sorts of things, money, love, whatever.
And I also think it highlights a really important, for everybody doing this work, which, people are coming from all different walks of life, really looking at cultural shadow that you've been programmed that maybe don't align with your true authentic self. And I would see that a lot with clients early on. I had clients of every type of culture, and we really would have to address that based on what their soul's authentic code was, or their dreams were, and their hopes were. Anything that was conflicting with that may not truly align, on a subconscious level with their actual soul.
Yeah, even like educational or professional success. There must be so many stories like this, but I actually became tearful when I heard the story, got triggered, obviously, when I heard the story, which was about a really successful woman of Chinese, Asian descent, but American, saying that when she was born, her father was so disappointed that she was a girl that she basically spent the rest of her life trying to prove herself by getting higher education and having a really successful career. But there was nothing she could do that was going to, aside from changing her gender, that would satisfy what was in her father's shadow. So, she would have to work on, again, the unattachment to what society says about your value as a person based on things that aren't actually who you are.
I think you highlight a really great point in there too, Dr. Tara, which is that when we're being shamed by others or watching others shame other people in the community or whatever, or judge them or ridicule or pass, their ethical standard on them, that is their shadow. And so if we can start witnessing that as that instead of the rules of the world, or the rules of society or how we need to placate, even though they might be an incredible person, if you see that person casting their shadow out, it kind of gives you a little bit more understanding of, oh, okay, I don't have to now cower in fear or put this thing in my shadow, because I can just witness their shadow and understand it as that instead of internalizing it and perpetuating the cycle.
I have to say that's been probably one of the most freeing aspects of this work, especially myself, at this point, it's a little bit more public and whatnot. Anytime we're getting a bad review or somebody's, casting their shadow on X, Y, and Z, I can always be like, I just send them love. I see it so clearly what's being triggered, not only psychically, but also just recognizing their shadow. And they're on their process, they're on their journey. And it's a really, not saying I'm always that Zen, but that's a really freeing thing when you begin to integrate your own shadow. You are able to be very compassionate with other people's shadow while not taking it on at the same time.
Yeah. There's a big difference between feedback and shadow. There's just an energetic difference of, oh, this person genuinely cares, this is what they're feeling, and, oh, okay, this triggered something deep within this other person that they're really talking about their relationship with their father through this review or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I think a really great way to decipher which is one's usually respectful, the other's triggered. And myself, when I see myself with Max giving very triggered feedback, I'm like, seems to have a lot more to do with myself than it does with Max. So, that's a really good way to decipher between the two of, am I really interacting with somebody else's shadow, or am I interacting with some, wonderful feedback that I could integrate and learn from?
Daniel's really good at this, but he'll call out in the middle of a conversation. He'll be like, okay, I will clean the dishes, but is this really about the dishes? And I'm like, oh, damn really it, he got me.
Yeah, but this is also the guy that gives you a cuddle before you have an argument. So.
I know. Unicorn.
Because it doesn't matter how many times you repeat any process. If you are in denial and you don't even admit it in a DI, then it's not going to change. I had a neighbor who, when I was, I guess, in my early teens, bit awkward, super skinny, like looked so young, I couldn't get into like 13 movies or 18 movies with my friends and things. She said to me, when you're 30 plus, all your friends will be jealous of how you look. And I remembered that. So, and for so long into my 30s, I would get ID'd, I would get, questioned about my qualifications because I looked too young and blah, blah, blah. And recently, because, we've been almost a year in lockdown and I haven't dyed my hair for a year. And I've actually realized it's not as bad as I thought it was when I was dyeing it. Someone said to me, I'm saying this to you because I love you, but you should dye your hair. And I actually think, because it's so in that person's shadow, that they meant it positively. And she said, because, don't you want to look youthful? And I was like, I've looked youthful my whole life. I want to look grown up, finally. So I think it's, it's obviously youthfulness is in her shadow. Because I had that one really good experience early in life from that neighbor, that's really stuck in my neural pathway. But what I was at the point I was actually trying to make, because it could have had a bad effect, could have triggered me, is that shadow comments from other people will sometimes come in the guise of, I really care about you, so I'm telling you this. And that's why it's so important to do the work, because otherwise you could easily get sucked into that.
Yeah. And I think that's, kind of going back to the feedback versus somebody else's shadow thing too, really, really starting to decipher that. And I think it's incredibly important in this time when everything's so heightened in every possible way, shape, and form for everybody's mental and personal sanity.
Yeah, I love that one, Tara, because there are so many, I don't know what it is. I feel like it's a East Coast thing or a Jersey thing, but that line of, I'm only telling because I love you, but you need to put makeup on, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. And I'm like, going home now and I hear that and I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. What's going on here? So it's really interesting to reflect back after integrating all of those things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. There's so much to unpack here and I can't wait to dive into shadow. Thank you both so much. And we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Dr. Tara. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Bye. I hope you all enjoyed that episode as much as we did. And if you're starting to get a feel for this to be magnetic manifestation process, but aren't completely sold yet, let me point you to some of our free offerings. You can check out the expanded podcast episode called How to Manifest Anything You Desire, where Lacy, the founder, and I break down exactly what this process is all about. You can check out The Motivation, which is our testimonial library with thousands of testimonials of people who have manifested wild things using this process. And right now we have our Magnetic Self Challenge going on. It is not too late to join. You can start living as your most confident self in just 6 weeks. Sign up anytime and walk through step by step as we reconnect you with your high self-worth, your intuition, and face your fears to become a completely upgraded version of self in 6 weeks. Enjoy. We'll see you next week.